Hello and welcome to a new episode of Quickies with Angela and Katie.
Hi, I'm Angela Dawn of Authentic Heart Coaching. I'm a tantric sex coach and I help people get closer.
And I'm Katie Wilkinson of Katie Coaches. I'm a sex, love, and relationship coach, and I can help you bring more pleasure to your partnership by bringing more pleasure to yourself. For today's episode, we invited Dr. Tina Schermer Sellers to talk with us about sexual shame and purity culture.
Yes, I'm excited to get into these topics because we've never really had an episode entirely devoted to religious sexual trauma and shame.
This is new territory for us. Dr. Tina is a licensed sex and gender feminist psychotherapist, a best-selling author, researcher, professor, and media personality whose expertise spans sex therapy, spiritual intimacy, parenting, medicine, and social justice. We're very excited to hear from you, Dr. Tina. Welcome to Quickies.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with both of you. I think today's conversation is going to be a lot of fun and hopefully really informative.
We
Mhm.
think so too. So, to start things off, can you tell our listeners more about your background and your focus area as a therapist?
Sure. So that kind of supposes that there's one focus, but I'm old enough that there's been an evolution in my development, in my interests. Yeah, kind of where life took me. So I began and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I went and did specialized training in medical family therapy, which looks at the impact of illness and our lives on our health and wellness. Did a lot of training of physicians during those years, worked in a family medicine residency clinic. Um, and and then, not really then, it was sort of kind of along the way, but I was teaching in a graduate program, marriage and family therapy program, and I was asked to teach their human sexuality course, which is a required course for licensure as a marriage and family therapist in the state of Washington. I was thrilled to teach this class. I didn't realize yet at the time how odd that was, that I loved teaching about sexuality, but that's got a whole story of its own. But anyway, I taught that class beginning in the early 90s. And right around the year 2000, I started to notice that my students were describing their sort of sexual arc, their sexual life. And this, probably like, well, how in the world did you hear about this? Well, I actually asked my students to write their sexual autobiography in that class.
Hmm.
Wow, right? But and
Hmm.
I would say to them, this isn't to torture you, I promise. But I know you're only as good a therapist as you know what your own stories are, where
Hmm.
you begin and end, and your clients begin and end, and you don't get those things confused. And the way to know that is to really dive into the different aspects of your story. Sexuality in the United States, we don't have comprehensive sex ed. Most homes are silent or silent in shaming. So I don't expect you to know the whole arc of your story. But if I ask you to reflect on like 60, 70 questions and kind of walk you through a way to think about it, you might be able to put it together in a more or less cohesive way and get clearer about what your legacy story is and what story you want to take forward, whether you want to continue that or change that or whatever. And so I was reading these. I've read well over 600 of these in my career. And what I noticed around the year 2000 was that students were beginning to describe their stories, which, mind you, the stories hadn't really shifted all that much. But the way they described themselves in the context of that story was they were more disgusted with themselves. They saw themselves as perverted. They had no sense of really common sexual curiosity or development across time. So when they would describe these stories, they would say, I think I was really perverted. I think that was really sick that I had that interest at that time or whatever. And I would be writing in the margins of the paper, sweetheart, you were so normal. You were so good. I'm so sorry there wasn't somebody there to tell you. Like, that's a normal curiosity for this age, or that's whatever. Um, and it started repeating itself, as next year, the next year. I would be in tears reading these because I was so heartbroken for how they felt about themselves and what they did and didn't understand about themselves. So I began to just do more research on what was going on, what was I missing in culture, being that I was a different age. And what I finally put together, what I was hitting the first wave of students who went through their adolescence in the early 90s and forward, right? And so I started asking more about, well, tell me more what you were exposed to, what was being said in your home, what was being said in your community. Were you involved in any like youth groups or anything? And it was really from this that I started to realize I was hitting the first wave of students that got abstinence only education, which we rolled out in the 80s, but it started to kind of peak, or hit a plateau in the early 90s. We now know that was religious education. It was 80% medically inaccurate, but we pumped billions and billions of dollars into it. The federal government did, which was a merging of church and state. That's what happened in the 80s. That's why we see what we see now, because there was no stopping that. And it really had a very huge socio-political push that actually had the front of family values, but behind was all about growing capitalism and corporations and corporate wealth. So that's been going on now for 45 years. So people go, how do we get here? And I'm like, it's pretty strategic, and it has a real story to it. But then there were a whole lot of people and churches who then took that a whole new measure, and students would have experiences like sitting in a youth group or a community group, and somebody passes around a piece of foil as the director, the person is talking about how important it is that you keep yourself pure, that you don't give yourself away emotionally or physically or spiritually, because if you do, and they're asking them to fold the foil up, crunch it up while they're talking, they said, because open up your foil and now look what it looks like in comparison to how it was when we gave it to you. That's what will happen to you if you give yourself away. And this was happened with pieces of flowers that were passed around. People were asked to take the petals off, or an apple that was passed around, they were told to take a bite of, or a lollipop or whatever. And then always showing them that they would be damaged goods and nobody would want them. Right. And so this was happening for millions and millions of kids beginning in the early 90s, who then hit, around 2000 and beyond, hit this place of feeling like nobody could possibly love me. It's a bigger story than that. I found out as I began to do research, and it took me 11 years to write the book, Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy. But I learned a lot in that time and have since. It was just a powerful movement. They estimate now that as many as 20% of adults now who are like under 40 can describe having that experience in one way or another. They either grew up in the Bible Belt or they grew up actually in some of this stuff without anyone to talk to, because we have a longer history of parents not getting sex education, and then they're just silent around it. Right. So that's kind of how my career took a turn in the world of sexuality. I got my PhD in it, and then got, certified, and I now do supervision of people across the United States. And I have another story of how I added psychedelics, psychedelic assisted therapy to my training in the last few years. And in part, it's related in that I really believe that it'll be an important way to help catapult some of the healing for people that have experienced religious sexual trauma, because it's particularly sticky in the way that it likes to cling to you. So I'm like, man, if we've got this, I want to be a part of supporting people who are doing this kind of healing. So I know that's a long answer, but I'm 64. So it's been at this for a while.
This idea of people telling their sexual story, right? I mean, we are just a shame-ridden culture, right? Like it just goes back to the idea of original sin, one of the reasons why I use Tantra in my work is there's no notion of original sin, right? You are whole as you are. You are perfect as you are. And all you need to do is continue to be more and more and more who you are, so that you're more and more and more in alignment, right? And that is not the bill of goods that so many of us that have grown up in recent years, we're sold, right?
Exactly.
Hear it in our language, just with the word slut, the fact that there is that word even.
Right.
That word needs to get erased. But yeah, it's just pervasive. What a beautiful story, Dr. Tina.
Yeah, it is very pervasive. And in fact, at some point I can share with you, we had some research that was done in 2017 looking at, do we do we even have an operational definition of sexual shame? Has there been research enough? Because we have stuff on shame. We certainly know that because of the good work of Brene Brown, but nothing on sexual shame. And so there was somebody who did a doctoral dissertation and in her interviews, distilled all the data and everything, came up with a definition. And it's so compelling when you hear the definition, because people like you and I and other therapists, and especially sex therapists, people that work in the sexuality relationship field, right? They see this every day, every day. And yet we didn't have anything sort of in black and white. And I can remember I was flying home from a speaking gig and was reading this dissertation. And I was like, oh, finally, we have it here. So we can say, this is how it hurts people. It incredibly impacts their ability to attach and give and receive love, which is a core to how we find happiness as humans. And it's incredibly compelling, and it's widespread. One of the things I like to say about this piece of research is there were only a couple of participants who had religious backgrounds. The rest did not describe having religious backgrounds. So this is not specific to religious sexual shame. Religious sexual shame has a whole nother layer on top of it, right? But it shows how pervasive it is in our culture right now. And I believe that's because of the shift that we made in the early 80s and how that's impacted regular everyday people when combined with silence around sexuality in their home and only having media to do this. The other thing I was thinking, as you were talking, Angela, is a lot of times we go back, if we have it's a basic understanding of sort of Christian or Jewish scripture, or maybe more should say Christian scripture, and we think that it's original sin, or people will say that it's when the Puritans came over or the Victorian era or whatever. One of the things I did when I wrote my book is I asked the question, has Christianity always been sex negative, or was there ever a time somewhere on that Abrahamic line? Because as I'm sure you know, you not everybody can go to the Eastern side of things, even though there's so much beauty and power in the Eastern side of things. A lot of people are like, that just feels too weird to me. And I'm like, okay, so I have to ask the question, was there anything there that's sex positive? So I got so deep into Jewish mystic writing and scripture writing, because I do not have that background, but I was teaching at a school that had a theology school. So I had people to ask, like, am I getting this right? And I put in the book, like, what I found, which was like 8 different incredibly positive, sex positive, erotic positive, life force positive stories that were in Jewish writing and still taught in Jewish schools today, but it never got brought forward in the institutionalized development of the Christian church, which started in the 4th century. And it was all about how you could deny the body and the body was not to be trusted. Now, that didn't have anything to do with Christianity or the Christian story, but it had everything to do with what was happening in culture in the 4th century when Constantine, as an emperor, was picking the people to be the leaders of this brand new institutionalized religion that very much informs the US today. We're still blaming women. That was part of that. When they couldn't be spiritual, when those men couldn't be spiritual enough, who did they blame? They blamed the women.
Right.
In the 11th century, when they said celibacy was what the priests were going to do, the men up and left their families destitute. But we're still blaming women. And today we're still doing the same thing. So there's an inbred misogyny in any of our patriarchal religions, but we see it very much in Christianity, for sure.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So diving in here, I would actually really love to hear the sexual shame definition if you have it handy.
I do. Yeah. And I'd love to share it with you. I think it's so helpful for readers. So this came out of the work of Dr. Noel Clarke. And the definition is this: sexual shame is a visceral feeling. So it's in our bodies, right? A visceral feeling of humiliation and disgust toward one's own body and identity as a sexual being, and a belief of being abnormal, inferior, and unworthy.
Mm.
This feeling can be internalized, which is really where it begins. It begins at 11 months when the little one finds their genitals, right? They're getting their diapers changed, they're in the tub, and they find their genitals because they've just begun to realize that this hand belongs to them. And they've started reaching for things, right? So it's an accident, it happens, but it's a fabulous day, right? Because we have amazing load of nerve endings there, right? And so they find it. And if they have a parent or a caregiver that says, yep, that's your vulva, it's such a fabulous part of you, or that's your penis, it's such a fabulous part of you, now let's finish drying you off or changing your diaper or whatever, then it's a non-starter. The kid goes, oh, okay, nose, ears, penis, whatever, got it, right? That's just like part of what you're doing. You're labeling their world for them. But that's not what happens to most people. Most people, the parent or caregiver gets all freaked out and says, oh my gosh, don't, that's dirty, that's gross, slaps their hand away, right? So that's the first time that the child has an innate feeling that whoever I am isn't okay, because I don't know what I did because I was just being me. No clue. Mind you, this happens hundreds and hundreds of times until they're like 4 and they start to get, oh, I need to go to my room or go into the bathroom, right? So it's it begins, it's internalized first, but it manifests in interpersonal relationships, having a negative impact on trust, communication, and physical and emotional intimacy. So it's every place we bond. Sexual shame develops across the lifespan, like I spoke of, in interactions with interpersonal relationships, usually caregivers at the beginning. But then one's culture and society adds a whole new layer, right? We're not good enough. And it creates a subsequent critical self-appraisal, or an internal critic that starts a feedback loop that we carry with us the rest of our lives. Right? There is also a fear and uncertainty related to one's power or right to make decisions, including safety decisions related to sexual encounters, along with an internalized judgment toward one's own sexual desire. So this was really highlighted in Peggy Ornstein's book, Girls and Sex, when she interviewed like 80 girls about, life. And what she found was they could describe being competent in every area of their life until they got ready to go out. And then they were putting down 3, 4, and 5 shots of hard liquor because they didn't know they could keep themselves safe or they had the right to. This is how pervasive our rape culture is. This is not just religious. This is across the board because we have had such an increase in violence against women since the 80s, starting in media, starting in movies, but then going to music videos, going to video games, right? Going to heterosexual pornography, right? So much more misogyny and violence against women that now it is the air we breathe and the water we drink, right? And so all of that is in that definition. Isn't that incredible?
That is. Oh my goodness. I love that you mentioned that shame is in every place that we bond.
Yeah.
That it shows through, it comes through and overlaps there.
Right. And being successful, having a lot of money, having a lot of things, I always say there's nothing wrong with that. It's going to make you comfortable, but it is not going to make you happy. Happiness and joy comes from the strength of our relationships and our ability to give and receive love well. We know this if you've ever seen what, I'm blanking on his name, but the guy that had Apple, who started Apple, Steve Jobs.
Yeah, Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, right? He wrote on his deathbed, right, through the last few weeks of his life, about what a fool he had been and that he had not known joy because it was all about making money. And while everybody admired him, he was realizing that was such a waste of what was really important. And he talks about that. It's really very compelling. But yeah, this is part of what we've got going on.
Yeah. And just wow, right? The piece around, I feel like we've already covered 12 subjects, but the piece around this sort of like purity culture and sexual shame not being restricted to any particular set of religious beliefs, right? But yet
Right.
something we've all experienced.
Right.
And that's pretty
And it's so,
powerful.
it is, it's so much more connected to patriarchy, how we structure
Mhm.
patriarchy in the United
Mhm.
States and in the world, and really in many ways, than it is on religion, but what hides behind a religious front, right? Because there's many faiths of this world that are beautiful and really have a lot to do with love and justice and all kinds of things. And I would say the core of Christianity was like that. But ever since it's been institutionalized, it's been about colonizing and power over of the dominant white, usually white men, but the dominant man culture of that place. And that's what we see that's been shaping things.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about um, the spread of organized Christian
Mm-hmm.
thought, as it were, become turning into colonialism.
It was. Yeah,
Turning
absolutely was.
into, yeah, I
It
mean,
was.
yeah. So we're talking about something much broader here. And,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, maybe like let's look at it that way, right? So maybe we're not just thinking about purity culture, but just conditioning in general, right? This is just
Mm-hmm.
societal conditioning.
Right. Right. And I mean, obviously I think it's important to see how it's connected, the intersections of all of it, right? I think that's really helpful to see. And yet there was a very interesting movement that happened because of all of these things that the Christian churches took a hold of. And again, it was about controlling sexuality and particularly controlling women inside of that.
Mhm.
Again, we've seen that only accentuate in many ways across culture, but that was, very much when people tell these horrific stories of what was said to them and how frightened they had become as their sexuality was developing and their interests were developing and their identities, were sort of making themselves manifest. And yeah, so there are, people will say, yeah, I was one of those people that I was raised in a cult, a
Mhm.
Christian cult, or this kind of cult. It was so authoritarian. It involved um, being homeschooled, being told things that were not true, being told that that was the only way I was going to have worth in the world. And there's some interesting podcasts out there and books out there that really talk about the profound impact of people that had that additional layer
Mhm.
of the religiosity that was inside of evangelical Christianity, and not just evangelical. I mean, the Mormon and LDS communities were facing this too. Some of the more conservative Catholic churches were facing this too. And it was at first it was a socio-political movement that got strengthened inside these conservative churches.
Mhm. Mhm.
For somebody who grew up under, I mean, I feel like most of us pretty much grew up under some level of this conditioning, but for somebody who's ready to start undoing this patriarchal
Yeah.
conditioning, where would you suggest that they begin? And is your book a good place to start?
Yeah, actually, I think, and this isn't just because I wrote it, but I really do think if you want to see the whole picture and what was socio-political and what was actually tied to sort of the core messages and values of Christianity, that book is going to be really helpful. It's going to help you see it through a historical lens, but then it's also going to go on and tell you how to heal. And it's going to give you some positive stories that say, yeah, you weren't meant to know it this way. You could have known it this way too, and then it'll give you practices that you can do that to kind of integrate a spirituality and a sexuality that feels right to you, whatever that is. And so the book is really it's not big, but it kind of goes through a lot of, I think, useful things. The other thing I often recommend to people, especially if they're like, I don't like the way I grew up, it feels like it haunts me, like I just don't know. Like my body is like telling me to be afraid of things, but my head is telling me I'm okay. Right. Like, can you help with that? And I often say that the Shameless Parenting book, Everything You Need to Raise Shame-Free Confident Kids and Heal Your Shame Too, fun, kind of in a funny way, that book has also been super helpful to people who want to kind of reparent themselves. They want to walk themselves through. If I had got it right, birth to 2 or 2 to 4 or 4 to 6 or 6 to 8, what would I have been getting? What were the messages I would have been getting? And what would I have been naturally curious about and expressing that probably got squashed, right? And then at the end of each of those little chapters, I'm like, go to the library and get these books for kids and this book for adults. And then you would have actually known what would have been read to you and what would have been said to you, because it's not, comprehensive sex ed isn't just about sexuality. It's about things like body autonomy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can be safe. I can have boundaries. That's okay for me, right? I can say yes. I can say no. I can figure out what I like and what I don't like. That's okay. So it teaches you that you're this way and other people are that way, and we need to learn to respect each other, right? And have boundaries. So it teaches all those things all along the way, and all these great books that we have now. So I'm like, do those things. And in the book, I talk about healing the mess, the model for erasing sexual shame, MESS. And it's 4 things. It's and this is included in my book. It's frame, name, claim, and aim. And frame is get yourself a frame or scaffolding of sex ed. Come to find out what you were told that was not true and what is remarkable about you that is true, right? Frame. Name is tell your story to someone who can listen with compassion and empathy and help you know you're not alone. Your story falls in the range of common. You are so lovable. You are so worthy, right? And you can do that with friends. If you've got friends like that, you can read the book together and do that for each other. But that's the name part, because shame has a hard time living inside the context of empathy and compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And then claim is claim your body is good. I don't care what it looks like. If you get to get up in the morning and you get to feel like not in so much pain that you're just crippled in pain, but you're able to feel some amount of liberation when you get up in the morning with your body, then I want you to see your body as good. I don't want you on your deathbed to go, oh, I missed out on what a great body I had. Like my body it's the pen. I write the poetry of my life. But the shape of my body has more to do with my heredity than it has to do with anything else. It doesn't have to do
Mm-hmm.
as much with your diet or whatever, you know. You were going to be like this because your people are like this, you know, kind of a thing. So when you frame, name, and claim, when you do those 3 things, what you're going to find you're going to do is peeling the onion. You're going to be really getting yourself down to that authentic core, and it's going to change. It's going to aim you towards a different sexual legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're going to, all that new learning is going to set you on a path that's going to feel so much more aligned with who you are. And you'll be able to see how other people are, how they are, which is just different than you, which is all fine and good. We weren't supposed to be the same, you know? So I'm like, do those things and you'll find yourself feeling so much more liberated in time. But understand that you didn't get this way overnight, and it's not going to go away overnight.
Yeah.
It's going to take time. Yeah.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
the only other thing I would add to that is I would say that psychedelics, with people who have done some of that foundational work, I think psychedelics are going to catapult them because they give you a bodied experience of being worthwhile and filled with love, and the world is a safe place. I mean, it gives you bodied experiences that actually change the way that your brain is wired.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm a fan of well-supported psychedelic therapy myself. And there's so, I don't know, Dr. Tina, we could have like 3 different conversations right now, but I think the key thing is, you know, I love how you mentioned that your book gives that historical context piece, but it also gives you some tools. And I think, you know, with my clients that have sexual shame, which is, you know, probably all of them on some level, it's about rewriting that internal story, right? So
Exactly.
however you do it, we have to rewrite and update the stories, the programs that are in our operating system. Yeah.
And I think it's clear
Exactly.
now that everybody needs sexual healing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think as a culture, we understand that you can hurt someone sexually. Like we understand that, and we're deathly afraid of things happening to our children, and rightly so. That's fine. But what we don't know as well, that you both probably know, is you can also do powerful healing through safe, loving sexual touch.
Mm-hmm.
Powerful healing that is bodied, that's neurobiological, right? It's the whole enchilada. And I think the people that know that best are people who have studied Tantra, people who work around in the realms of relationships and sexuality. But a lot of people are just plain old just brought the fear forward. And that's all they have. It's like sex is dangerous, period. Like, no, sex can be a place of powerful healing of the body mind process.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. I teach workshops for couples to learn to give each other tantric massage, which is a healing modality, right? Everyone's like, well, this is this really sexy taboo thing. And I'm like, actually, really talking about meeting each other's souls and having a healing experience. So,
exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, I think that there was a lot of shift that happened for me as I began trying to kind of integrate and understand this. And I was writing the book, and I went to a retreat with my partner by a couple that had studied Tantra, but they were both physicians. But it had so shifted their life that they were like, other people should experience this. So we went and did that. And I came out of that and I'm like, okay, I have just witnessed, 7 other couples, many of which who came in having not touched each other or liked each other for years. And at the end of that weekend, so much had been healed. And I'm like, that was faster than most therapies, right? And so I really started to dive into what was it that was happening there, and the need for us to have a different way to understand the power of safe, loving, negotiated touch, where your heart is open. And we did giver receiver exercises. We took everything that they had normally done, we took it off the table. And we said, you were going to learn to receive and you're going to learn to give separately and have really powerful experiences so that you can expand what making love means. What's that definition? And this is especially true with straight couples, cis couples, because they're the ones that have been this 2,500 years of it's all about the man and it's all about what he wants and it's all about, all that patriarchy, and we've needed to have a different story, and we can help people write a different story. By that. I know you guys see this all the time.
Absolutely. And even just touching back on the consent matter, we know that sexual violence is a pervasive problem. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, reports that nearly 1 in 5 women, about 20%, have experienced at least one completed or attempted rape at some point in their lives. And we also pretty much can agree that it's a far greater percentage than that.
It is.
Because we know it's reported.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I ask this question often to people under 40 and under. And I have yet to find one person, one woman in particular, who was out in the world having relationships in the last 40 years, 30 years or so, who hasn't been able to describe at least one unwanted sexual experience.
Yep.
I would say it is at least 80%. When you take childhood plus adult experiences, you're at least 80%, maybe higher, because you would have to have been in the house almost, like not going out and meeting people for you to not have an experience, because most guys don't know straight guys don't know how to seek consent and make all these assumptions. And they were told they were supposed to, right? We set them up to have a kind of perpetrator type of behavior, like they should know she's going to want it. She's going to like it. She's going to like these things I've seen on porn, whatever. And she's not learned to stand up for herself and say what she wants and doesn't want. Like we keep raising kids in this vacuum where we only give them media, which is entertainment. It's not real life. So we don't teach the skills of real life interpersonal relationships and how you do that with some kind of emotional intelligence, relational intelligence, sexual intelligence, and this is what we get.
Yeah.
Can you share some tips specifically on how to be your child's best resource and sex educator and ally as they're navigating this world that we haven't really set them up that well for?
No. And I just so love that question so much, and would do anything to get parents or people who have little ones in their life, no matter how they are, to actually really take that question seriously. There actually is research that says if you become a good sex educator, sex relationship, emotional, educator for your child at adolescence will tend to describe themselves as closer to you overall.
Mm-hmm.
So why is that? Because the kid has come to learn that my parents can talk about anything with me. They don't freak out. They don't make me feel bad. So they are a safe place. They are a resource for me. We know this from Northern European countries who do have comprehensive sex education, Holland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland. Mm-hmm. Starts in kindergarten, goes all the way through age 18, and those kids talk to their parents about when they're feeling ready to be sexual. And there's a really good book called Not Under My Roof. That's all about, it describes research, but it's interviews with kids in Holland and parents, and kids in the United States and parents. And it's fascinating because for, I think, a lot of parents, they would be shocked to see what kids want to talk to them about when they've been safe. So as far as how to do it, that's what's in the book, Shameless Parenting. It literally goes, you want to know what your kid's going to do from the time they're born until they're 2. Here's what they're trying to accomplish emotionally. Here's what they're trying to accomplish behaviorally. Here's where their curiosities are. Here's what they need from you. Here's what you can do for yourself if it scares you. Like, I don't know what to do if they find their genital. Here's what you need to do. And here's the leading books and podcasts for you to listen to, websites to go to. So I said, all you have to do is be 2 years ahead of your kid. So if you've got one that's 2, read up till 4 and get all the books. You don't have to have it all figured out, but I will literally hold your hand all the way through. And what's going to happen along the way is you're going to heal yourself too. Because you're going to see what you should have gotten, and you're going to be doing it for your little person when they grow up. And I've got 4 grown kids, and I grew up in a Swedish immigrant home that had an epigenetics of sex positivity and education. So this stuff is in my DNA already, right? And I get to watch my kids now as adults doing this with their nieces and nephews and their kids, because for them, it wasn't a big deal. They were their friend's sex educator. Because they could always talk about stuff at home, and we joked about it all the time, and we still do. It's like, how many crazy families do we have that are like ours? And I'm like, yeah, not in the US.
Not so many.
we're not so different than our relatives in Sweden. So we're not that special,
Yeah. Even the liberated folks don't want to talk about sex here in the US.
Yes.
Pretty wild.
Yeah. And I know, I'm always saying, don't beat yourself up. We set you up for this. This is what we gave you. But I want you to know that you can shift your internal experience and your relationship. And like you were saying, Angela, that story, you can shift that up with some time and some work. And I'm happy to help you or point you in that direction or whatever, because it's so doable. And then when you watch that legacy change, it's like the joy you have for the rest of your life in that all that hard work you did, it gets to live on now through your kids and your nieces and nephews and other children in your life. And man, I don't know what's better. I think that's awesome. Yeah. So good.
There's been so much good information shared in this episode. I feel like we could make a whole series on this practically. But thank you, Dr. Tina, so much for your time here today and for sharing about really all of this work. Where can our listeners go to find out more about you?
Yeah. So you can follow me on Dr. Tina Shameless, so DRTINA and Shameless at Instagram. My website is tinaschermersellers.com. So just my name in there. And on my, I think, homepage, there's a thing called the Sexual Reclamation Project. It's a free download, and that'll give you all the questions. If you want to do your own sexual autobiography to see what your own arc of your story is, you're welcome to grab that. I think there's also somewhere on there just a cheat sheet on developmental stages for kids. That you can find my books on Amazon. So Shameless Parenting, everything you need to raise shame-free, confident kids and heal your shame too. And then Sex, God, and the Conservative Church. Those are there. If any of your listeners can't afford either one of those books for any reason, they're welcome to DM me, and I'll send them a link to an audio version of the book that they can listen to, either book. Yeah, and if you want to know more about what I'm doing with psychedelic assisted therapy, if that's you're curious about that, you can go to inannarising.org. So INANNA rising, RISING.org. Or our Instagram is brand new, like it's not very old, but it's Inanna underscore rising underscore PAT, which stands for psychedelic assisted therapy. And you can follow us there. And if anybody wants to help me with social media, I would love their help. Just trying to do it all. I'm like always dropping balls someplace, So
I
anyway, but
feel
yeah,
that
I'd love to
pain.
hear from I'd love to hear from your listeners. That'd be great.
Oh, such wonderful resources, Dr. Tina. I've loved having this conversation that went everywhere from purity culture to what that did to our overall culture to how to undo it with your own kids, with the next generation. So
Yeah.
really appreciate you talking to us about this.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here with both of you. Thank you so much.
And that's all for this episode of Quickies with Angela and Caity. Thank you for listening, and you can follow us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube.
And if you'd like more great information on sex, love, and relationships, be sure to follow us on social media. I'm Authentic Heart Coaching on Instagram and AuthenticHeartCoach.com on the web.
And you can find me on CaityCoaches.com and on Instagram at CaityCoaches.
And if you're not having enough sex, definitely check out my free 3-minute intimacy triage. It's a downloadable PDF that you'll see a link to in the show notes. Check it out, download it. You'll find some solid ideas about how to remedy your particular situation. I also have another new free downloadable. It's a bingo game for folks who are working with intimacy. So whether you're just starting out on getting intimate again or you want to really turn up the heat, I've got a bingo board just for you. That's AuthenticHeartCoach.com/bingo. And if you would rather do work privately to help you and your partner grow in your intimacy, let's have a conversation about how I can help you to light a fire and transform your relationship. I also have a weekend couples retreat happening in May, and I think by the time this airs, there might only be one spot left in it. So jump on that.
We also have a free training about how to have more mindful and connected sex that feels amazing for people with vulvas. You can check that in the show notes. And of course, if you're ready to go deeper into your sexual practice with guidance designed specifically for her pleasure, we have our signature on-demand masterclass series called Pussy Whispering. And with that said, we'll see you next time on Quickies with Angela and Caity.